We're now going to sew the vertical card slots. You should have two of these J pieces, one of them interfaced, one of them not interfaced. And the interface piece, you need to cut off 1/2 inch from the side. So it is 1/2 inch narrower than the other one. You've got your K pieces, which you should already have interfaced, but if you haven't, go ahead and interface them with the piece L interfacing pieces. And you will need your M reinforcement pieces and your 2N binding pieces. First, we're going to take these reinforcement pieces and all of these card slots and sew these inside. So I'm going to place this right in the middle, up here next to this crease, and then fold it in half. And then I am going to sew across this to top stitch it. I actually have to switch my thread. I just sewed that with gray thread. I've been working on the gray ones as well. So let me just change my thread. All right, brown thread. And I'm just going to sew over this again so that all of my pieces will match. All right, and that's the first one. And we're going to do that 8 times for the large, 3 times if you're doing the small. But I like to do this in a way that is more efficient. So first I'm going to put all of the reinforcement pieces in. If you hear my 4-year-old yelling about hamsters in the background, I taught him a game that I thought that he would love and that would entertain him while I did videos, but he loves it so much that he's yelling all about it. It has flying hamsters. And once these are all in place, we're going to sew them all at once, one continuous stitch. Chain stitching. So as I sew, I make sure that my bottom corners over here are matched up and that they didn't get warped or changed or moved around. I'm getting to the end of that, and I will go to my next one and just sew right on over. This is a lot faster than having to do each one at a time and dealing with trimming the thread every time. And here the corners have gotten quite off, so I need to really make sure that I have this folded nicely in half. And there I am done with all of them. And I will just snip in between them all. Alright, so I've got all 8 of these, 3 for the small. And now you really need your seam gauge for this. And I'm going to move, it's hard to move my sewing machine because of my mat. But it's also hard for me to work with over here instead of right here. So, alright, I've got my J piece, the one that's trimmed. And I'm going to lay it right here. And actually, one thing I did is I kept this piece around. I'm going to lay this on top of it. And that'll help me arrange my card slots. So the way that these go is that for the small, they are a 1/2 inch apart, and for the large, they are 5/8 of an inch apart, which, let me see, that is 1.3 centimeters for the small and 1.6 centimeters for the large. But here at the top edge, it's a little bit more, at 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters for the seam allowance. And so this has 3/4 of an inch up at right here, or 1.9 centimeters. And for the large, it is 7/8 or 2.2 centimeters. So lots of numbers there. But if you follow it, it ends up looking very nice and very even. And I've got to make sure that since I have, I used a pattern with a specific orientation, I've got to pay attention to that. Wow, in my head, this was not going to be nearly as distracting, all these prints, but I should have just stuck with a solid for this video. As you might be able to see as you're doing this, it starts to get very thick, lots of layers, which is why I try to keep the interfacing out of the seams as much as possible. Okay, so now I've got mine laying out nicely, and if you don't have a pattern piece, just make sure that you check each one that it's 5/8 of an inch, and double check that. Looks like one of mine is slightly off, so I'm gonna move it up a bit. Okay. And then what I like to do is I clip every second one. And then as I sew them, I move my clips up to the next one. So to make this look as good as possible, the finished result, double check that all of your corners match up, all of your sides and edges match up. Of course, it's not going to be perfect because I doubt you cut and sewed everything perfectly, but it should be everything as straight as possible. I'm going to put this here because sometimes as you sew, it'll shift the fabric down. I want to keep that from shifting. Okay, now I'm going to move my sewing machine back. Okay, so this first one I'm going to sew pretty close to the edge. I don't want this showing up later on outside of the seam allowance. So then I'm going to move my clips up and fold this back. And as I'm sewing, I'm keeping this flat because if I let it go up or down, it's going to adjust where this is actually falling. So I'm going to do my best to keep it straight. I'll do them one at a time, all the way up to the top. Until I am done. And then the final result, it looks like this for the small. And I'll finish the large in a minute. So you don't need to worry about these raw edges. I have made card slots like this for years and used wallets for years like this. And I've never had an issue with that raw edge being down there because it's completely covered up. And it's just so far down there that if you get a few stray threads, they never get long enough to come out the top. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this large. All right, I'm all done sewing this, so they're all sewn like that now. Now I'm going to just keep them clipped. So they don't shift around as much. Okay, for this side, so let's see. If we're looking at the finished wallet like this, this will be the bottom. Let me get, oops, bumped my camera. If you're looking at your finished wallet like this, the card slots go this way. Now, I like them like that, but if you prefer your wallet to be like that, have them like that, then you can switch the way they go here. But I am going under the assumption that you're going to have them the same way as mine. So, card slots to the left, get one of your piece and card slot binding pieces, and we're going to put this along the bottom, right sides together. So even though I call this a binding piece, this is not actually we're not actually binding this side. It's more like a border down here. But I had you cut it out of the with the same piece as the binding piece, just to make things simpler, not have as many pieces. But we are going to be trimming off the extra from this. Alright, so we're sewing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, 6mm seam allowance. And hopefully your machine can handle this, especially because we trimmed back the interfacing from the seam allowances. But if your machine struggles, just take it slow. I am going to increase my seam allowance, or sorry, increase my stitch length and top stitch this. Now we're going to get our other piece J, the one that does not have interfacing. This is going to be the actual backing piece. You'll notice that it's not quite as wide as your card slots and this thing. That's because we're going to trim off the extra of the border. But for now, place these wrong sides together and match them on this side that doesn't have binding yet, because we are going to bind the this edge and attach the backing all at the same time. So first I put the backing back here, and you see their wrong sides are together. Then I need to get my second binding piece, and this is going to go on the top, right sides together. All 3 layers, we're going to sew them at the same time. Okay. Sorry, bumped my camera. All right. Be very careful with your seam allowance. If you go a little too big here, then when you are folding the binding over, suddenly it's going to be too short. So now I'm going to turn this around to the back so you can see how I'm folding this binding. I fold the binding up, so it looks like this now on this side. I fold this raw edge to match this raw edge, like this. And then I fold this all the way over and see it just barely covers the stitching line that you just had. It's important that it covers that stitch line, because when we stitch, we're going to stitch from the front side, and we want to make sure that our front stitches catch the back fold. Okay, so from the front side, I am going to increase my stitch length, and I am going to sew not right in the middle of the seam, but just to the right of it. So it's called edge stitching. I'm going to edge stitch right here on the binding. On the binding, not the card slots. Then the big reveal, always turning around to see, did it? Yes, good. Perfect. Okay. We now need to fasten the other side. You see, it's just a little bit too wide right here. I'm going to baste this. I'm going to use a basting stitch, and I'm going to baste from this side. And remember, keep your basting stitch within that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Actually, I'm going to move, I have the ability to do this, a lot of machines do. I moved my needle over because the edge of my foot was running up to the thickness over there from the card slots and making it a little bit hard to stitch. So as I'm going, I'm making sure my backing is flat. And now I can easily cut off the extra. Okay, so I'm done with my vertical card slots, and they will be going on the lining, but not yet. For now, I'm going to work on the change pocket. So we're going to do that next. I wanted to make sure I showed you what the small looks like. So large, small. Small is also a solid color, so I thought it'd be easier for you to see. And when we're ready, we'll sew it on the bottom of the lining.